welcome to the Prism Award celebration weekend. We have our first panel, Webcomics of the Future, talking about the digital age of creating comics. And here we have some amazing panelists, all involved in various ways in the Prism Awards this year. And with no further ado, we'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves to you, awesome people out there watching.
All right. Hi, I'm Vincent Cow, but I go by the Cow on social media. I'm the author of Magical Boy, which is one of the finalists for the webcomic for Prism Awards. I'm also the creator of a slice of life comic strip called Mondo Mango. I've been drawing all my life, but only been actively creating comics professionally for like past 5 to 6 years.
Hi, my name is Brooke Huang, and I'm an executive editor at Tapas Media, better known as the editor for Cow's comic Magical Boy. I've been with Tapas for about 3 years, and at my role at Tapas, I have the absolute joy and privilege of working with a lot of talented creators to bring their stories to life.
Hi, I'm Jade Sarson. I'm the creator of Café Suada, which is nominated as well for the webcomic category. I've been doing that for about 10 years now. Blimey. But yeah, I'm non-binary and just really chuffed to be part of this panel today.
Hi, I'm Becky Hawkins. There are roofers next door, so I'm going to be on mute as often as possible. I got to be a judge this year, which meant filling my eyeballs with so many queer webcomics, and it was such a pleasure. I won the webcomic category last year for my webcomic Super Butch, which is a 1940s lesbian superhero history noir webcomic, which I have been doing. I draw it with my friend Barry. We do the story together. He does the script. I'm saying this while I try to do the math for how long we've been working on it, but I would say about 5 years.
Awesome. So just to kind of help get things started for today was, I guess, since we're specifically talking about webcomics, was there anything in particular that made you choose webcomics or digital comics as your form for those who are creators?
I'd say I'm very cheap, and webcomics are very cheap to, I mean, like, you know, it's technically not free because you need an internet connection, but aside from that, like, posting webcomics is really easy. There's a lot more barriers to physically publishing stuff, so it just seemed like a very quick and easy way to get my art into as many eyeballs as possible.
I also feel like it's an easier transition if you're posting your art on social media already, and you can just find more platforms to share your work, and you're like, oh yeah, I am a webcomic artist because I post on these social media.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way to kind of remind yourself that you're still working on a thing instead of coming out of your hole 7 years later holding a book. So just like emotionally, it works really nicely. It helps to keep yourself on a schedule. I think a lot of us also have day jobs or other things that we're doing. So just knowing, and oh my gosh, the first time someone you've never heard of comments like, I can't believe that happened at the bottom of the page, like it feels so good.
Yeah, there is that constant feedback aspect. Like when you put a book out, you then just kind of, there's like this weird like fade out of like twiddling your thumbs, like I'm gonna wait until like reviews come in, or a friend goes, I finally found this in a bookshop after hunting for ages, because it's not actually in a lot of bookshops. But with webcomics, yeah, when you put it out like on a weekly basis or even like multiple times a week, just even like maybe 2 or 3 people just saying like, oh, I've been looking forward to this, you're like, oh, energy.
Yes, that is so true. I could say I have self-published my Mondo Mango series into a book, and there are some like exclusive comics in there, and those are the comics that like I don't get instant feedback of, and it's so different from what I'm used to of like on the web, and like I wonder what they think about that specific exclusive comic, and I never know unless they specifically tell me about it, or they just tell me like a overall, oh, I love the book, but then still I don't get that feedback from that one specific comic.
I think, Jade, what you said about like the accessibility of webcomics, like anyone with an internet connection, like MS Paint or something, can theoretically make like a webcomic, right?
Yeah.
I think it's also true about like readers, because so many more people can discover it too. You don't need to have access to like a bookstore that carries comics. You don't need to go to like a comic store, which is like, you know, traditionally like not always a super inclusive place. I think the internet is just such a wide community, and it really allows you to connect with people that kind of tell stories that you're interested in hearing.
Yeah, I think for the reader too, it's nice to have like a longer term connection with the reader. Like I over the years, you know, you can go from like college to this job to that job, and like Monday means that there's going to be a page, and
yeah, there is something like really awesome about having like a weekly thing to look forward to, or not necessarily weekly. It's just weekly in my case. But
aiming for weekly in my case.
So yeah, like I don't know. It's not only like from the perspective of a creator, but as a reader myself as well. It's like, right, my webcomic's out now. Let's see who else has got theirs out. You know, it's like a great kind of community formed around webcomics.
Yeah, I think it's also really cool that like creators can interact directly with their fans too, right? Responding to comments and stuff. I know Cal has gotten a lot of like really great comments. I don't know if you wanted to share some of those, Cal.
I wasn't ready for that, but yeah, like the comments, I'm always surprised and blown away by the response I get from my webcomic, because I was so scared at first of how they're going to take it. But there's been a lot of positive feedback that it's like my comic is about, focuses on a trans man, right, and his story and transitioning or trying to be himself. And then when I'm reading the comments, I realize and can see that it's not just for them, like people who are outside the community, like pitch in and say how much it helps them get like a view inside how it's like to be a trans man and just part of the community. Yeah.
That's really awesome. Like, something as well that I've experienced is I was really nervous, including my first non-binary character in Café Suada, and I was like, oh, I'm really gonna push like their pronouns and their identity in my author comments, because I'm just like, I have this gut reaction that they might not be respected right away, but all of the comments were just immediately on board with who this person is as a person, not just as a character. So like that feeling of respect, it was almost like by proxy they were respecting me as well. So just validation.
Yeah, I think something really powerful about webcomics is also like, since they're so accessible, you have a lot of people reading the story just because it's like, oh, if I'm online on social media or like on a platform, they're just scrolling and this is really popular, let me read it, rather than having to like buy a book and pick it up and take it home and being like, you know, it feels like a much bigger like kind of barrier to entry. I think something that we've noticed from Magical Boy is that a lot of people read Magical Boy even if they're not trans, because it's still just a great story, and people can even empathize with Max even if they can't empathize with the trans experience, because it's about growing up, it's about overcoming hardships and kind of becoming who you are, and that's really like a universal experience. So, you know, even if people couldn't like relate to like the non-binary character, they respect who they are, like as a character and, you know, as a person in your story.
Yeah, I didn't grow up reading webcomics, and I realized that most of my like introductions to people who were like gender nonconforming or wheelchair users or all kinds of things was like old collections of dykes to watch out for. like when somebody on Twitter is like explaining something, I'm like, yes, I know that because someone chewed out Mo in 1991. Yes, but I think yeah, having webcomics and social media makes that a little easier.
Now, as a judge, did what was it like reading through all of these, and specifically knowing that they're webcomics? Sometimes webcomics are submitted as links to the comic itself, and sometimes it's submitted as a PDF form. So what was that experience reading and sort of judging what was specific about webcomics to you in that process?
I think most of the time the ones that we read as judges were chapters in a longer story. I think there was one that sort of felt like reading a mini comic, but it was online. But I think most of them felt like it was a longer work, kind of one by one. And I think I'm trying to think. That's a really good question.
We can come back to that a little bit later whenever it hits you.
Yeah, second.
For everyone else, aside from the reasons why you choose to make comics in the format of webcomics, is that your medium of choice for how you consume comics content? Like, do you prefer reading webcomics, or do you prefer reading the physical object, and why?
I can just jump in and say, like, the reason I chose to work at Tapas is because I've always been, like, a lifelong webcomic reader. I have just always felt like it's so much more accessible, especially growing up in a place where it's, like, I was interested in anime and manga, but, like, bookstores didn't really start getting that until I was a little bit older. So growing up, like, reading those stories online and reading stories, like, people that enjoyed, like, similar genres and stories, like, online was really, like, the place to do it. So that's kind of how I got into webcomics.
Yeah, it's a similar thing for me. Like, in my teens, manga started appearing on like just like one shelf in the bookshop, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of like really interesting genres within what people thought was a genre at the time. But then a friend at school started bringing in gay manga that they'd like imported. And I was like, where are you getting these? And they were like, well, you can read some of them online. And then suddenly I was just like barreling through volumes and volumes online. I find like if there's something that's quite like short, I prefer reading it as a book because like it's self-contained, so I can get through that relatively quickly. But with like webcomics, they tend to go on for like mine has gone on for years, and you don't want to like. I don't know, you don't want to spend a lot of money on like a massive pile and then sit there with that and just go through each one. But you know, with like I'm on iPad right now, and like I can just blast through, flip, done, and get through so many comics. It feels like a crime though, because like I know as a creator how long those take, and there's me going like real quick. I'm like, oh no, I've got to go back and reread it just to appreciate the art some more.
Yeah, same for me. Like, I grew up with a physical book, and I always enjoy flipping through those. And when it comes to, like, webcomics, I didn't really appreciate the scroller format of webcomics, not until, like, I started making it myself, that I started appreciating, like, actually, yeah, this is great for the mobile and everything. It's easier to see, because I know, like, manga format on phones is harder to read. You have to, like, zoom in, look, swipe. But like the scroller, you just swipe one direction, and it's so much easier. And then like when I look at other people's webcomics that are scroller format, like I can see their transitions, and it's like a different format that it's just like it's its own set of skills to like tell the story that way. And then I just came to have more appreciation for it after making it myself, because it is really different, and I like it more now. Before I was like, no, I want to stay the manga format style. That's what I've grown up with, and that's what I appreciate. Yeah, so it's been slowly changing.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's so much potential with the scrolling format. Like, I was reading some of your latest chapters today because I needed to catch up. And I saw there was, like, an incredible attack that Magic Boy does that, like, goes all the way down a massive, long, like, page. And it was, like, a rainbow attack and everything. So as you scroll, you see this gorgeous rainbow. And I'm like, the potential! Look at the potential here of the format. I need to do better.
Yeah, there's so much you can play with the panorama kind of like effects, and that was like what I was trying to focus on. Like, yeah, this is something that you can't do with manga style format.
Yeah, I find myself Like I've trained as like you know, as a physical book illustrator, so like I have such a deep love for like a good double page spread. Like when you read a physical book and you open onto a spread, you're like, oh, that's impactful. But then I go and post those online, and like the compression, oh, it's annoying. I need to figure out like how can I do both.
Yeah, Jade, I was actually going to ask what your I don't know if this is a good jumping off point. Your how you make your pages if it's digital, or it felt like the pages that I saw were really like textured, and it just felt like it would feel really good to read as a book. I don't know. A lot of the art I saw was digital, and yours just like felt like you could like rub your eyeballs on it. But I was
yeah, I'm 1,000,000% cheating there. It's all digital. I actually have an old school book from the 60s. It was my mom's, and it was like just like a school notebook. That the paper had like gone brown because it had just been left in like the back of the drawer untouched, and I loved the texture of it. I was like, I have to use this, so I like scanned them really high res, and that's like the basis of all my pages. But yeah, like all of the kind of tea textures and stuff, I've been like chipping away at it for years, trying to find like good brushes, scanning in bits of watercolor and painting with tea and stuff. It's all like scanning it and then composing it like digitally in a way that looks as like realistically textured as possible without actually being that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I really love that about your comic because it really fits in your story and your topic. And I'm just like,
oh, thank you. Yeah, that's something I really like to do with my comics. Is like make sure that the aesthetic matches the story. But I also have like such an incredible appreciation for you working in full color on a webcomic. Like every time I see a full color webcomic, I'm like exhausted. Like how?
Yeah, it is difficult, but it helps to have help. I've learned that too. Down the road, like you have that feeling of I must do everything myself.
Yeah.
And you realize if you want it to come out faster, you would need help, and it's not bad to do so.
So how does it work with? Sorry, how does it work with like your group? Because I've seen you've got a colorist, right?
Yeah. So I first started with a colorist where I did all the sketching, the thumbnails, and line arting, and then I'll send them the files and they put them in the flats and shading it. And once that was kind of figured out, like our process, we then added another team member who did the line art and the flats. So then it's like we just share the files from one person to the other. But also trying to like make sure like are these correct? There's no mistakes, and then I edit at the end, bringing it all together. Making sure
that sounds awesomely streamlined.
Yeah, well, we're trying.
Yeah, I think Magical Boy is definitely like a group effort. I think it's awesome to see like how talking to the team and like getting ideas and like sharing designs and stuff. It's really cool just to see like the thought process that goes into it.
It's also like it's great to have like a team because then you can just bounce ideas that you're just struggling by yourself. And you're like, I'm not sure, and then these people are working with you, so you can actually talk to them more in depth of like since they've been working on it too. Like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yes, okay. Also validation.
What's your both of your writing processes like in terms of do you think of it as sort of being a chapter at a time and figure out what's going to happen and script it and then start with the art, or how?
For me, it started from like a huge outline from beginning, middle, and end, and then from there I like specify each chapter, and then I go like it's like a funnel. So it starts very broad, and then I try to go specific in each chapter. So then once the chapters are kind of roughed out, I then really focus on that specific first chapter, second, third. Like I try not to start on the next chapter until like the current one is finished. I found out that some episodes were a lot longer than I intended. Like, I wrote too much, and then it was split into two.
Yeah, I think Cal has a great vision. Like, he really knows what he wants, but sometimes that means the episodes are like twice as long as they should be. So then we have to kind of go back through together and be like, oh, like, what's a good stopping point? Like, we should just kind of like cut this in half and try and like make it 2 episodes because it's twice as long as like 1 episode should be.
Because when you think of like, oh, I want this fight scene, and I forget like a punching scene takes 3 panels, it's a lot of work. Yeah, so that's what happens a lot.
As for me, it's funny, like, you talking about how great it is collaborating with a team, because I started working with an editor. Now, I can't remember if it was like late last year or the start of this year, because what even is time anymore? But her name's Claire Napier, and it's just been so much more fun having someone to bounce my initial drafts off of, because she picks up on things that I completely just miss. She'll be like, oh, you know, if you just change like the where this scene is and how this character phrases something, it plays into your theme better. And I'm like, oh my god, how didn't I even notice that? She's so good. And I tend to write chapter by chapter, but I actually started with I started writing the whole series in uni in my last year, and I just had this sketchbook where I had it was like a flowchart. I just filled a page with like events that I wanted to happen in a certain order, without actually thinking, oh, this is going to take me probably like 12 years to do. No, don't think about that. Think about how ambitious you are and how many things you want to draw. So I just wrote out all these lists of things that I wanted to get to. So my style of writing kind of became like, here's an event that I would like to draw because it would be really dramatic and really pretty and like a really cool thematic scene. How do I then get from A to B kind of thing? I have to actually write the next chapter soon because I'm coming to the end of Cup 8, and I'm like breaking it because it's difficult. It's getting like close to the end of the story. And I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to go with it. Like, I have a rough idea, and I have had an idea of like the end goal since I started, but like I'm now getting to like, writing an ending's really hard. You know, like you can have an idea roughly, but then actually getting the words and the dialogue out is so tricky.
I do have a question. Has your ending changed as you went through your story? Like, it's a bit like something like trailed off. You're like, oh, this is such a better idea from what I intended, you know?
Yeah, there's like, I think I knew what I wanted for, like, I knew how the characters should develop, but then things happened that I didn't expect. It's that age-old thing of like, hey, it turns out they have a life of their own, and I can't control them anymore. But yeah, so I have like, yeah, it's changed somewhat, but there was always a goal, like an event that was always going to happen. That's still going to happen, but I think the way they get there is going to be slightly different. What about for you?
It changed slightly, but it was like a surprise. It usually happens to like a lot of comics I used to make, where like I just go with the flow, where it's like what the story's going to take me. But for Magical Boy, I did have like, because I mentioned I wrote out the beginning, the middle, the end of like the rough idea of what I wanted to happen. But it was still vague. I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. But yeah, like my ending, like I just recently finished writing it all out. The ending is more impactful in a different way than I thought it would be. Like, I don't want to give spoilers or anything.
No.
But I know like, one of my characters that I wrote, her name's Piper, and she's like the Christian character.
Yeah.
It's like closeted lesbian, so spoilers. But yeah, like I wrote her knowing that she played an important role in the story, but at the same time I didn't realize how big of an impact her role would be until like I started seeing the feedback of people saying like how they appreciate that she still holds on to her religion despite being LGBT. And I'm like, yeah. But he's like growing as much, like her importance is just as much as Max. And I didn't know that was going to happen. It's like an amazing surprise. So like a lot of little bits happened during my creation of Magical Boy.
Yeah, I think that happened for me with one of my characters. I always planned for there to be there's a character who runs a rival bubble tea cafe, which is like an additional rival to our main two rivals. So that brings us to a total of 3 cafes who are rivals in this story. It's too many. But the third rival was going to be like an ex-best friend, and I eventually, when I actually got to designing her, I was like, this will be so much more dramatic and fun to write if they were actually ex-girlfriends. Why didn't I think of this when I first came up with this? And it did. It had such so much more depth as like a relationship about like not jealousy of like in a romantic sense, because like they split up when they were in school, and then they go their separate ways and open different cafes. So the jealousy is more to do with like success, and different kinds of success. So it was great to like look at those characters from a sense of like why their love relationship fell apart and why their business relationship is also falling apart now.
I did want to ask on what you were talking about with writing endings for a webcomic is they're often seen as almost this never-ending format. So what is it like in terms of the difference of when you're doing something physically, you have each maybe a monthly copy or each chapter or each volume of your comic that you're planning out, and you're still maybe planning installments or updates week by week. But what's different in the writing creating process when it's something that you're, there's probably for the most part in webcomics no immediate end coming. What is that process like in embarking on it? Do you think it's important that you have to have the ending sort of thought out? You both mentioned having one and that it changed. Or have you ever done it where you had no idea where it was going to go? Sorry, that was a lot of questions in one.
I got you. Did you want to go? Sorry.
Oh, I can say that Super Butch has been like the incredible expanding webcomic story. Like my friend Barry and I pitched it as a 16-page story for an anthology, and they said, no, thank you, but please, please, please make that. And it was supposed to be sort of a Superman-style superhero comic. And then Barry said, oh, I have an idea. What if there's a frame story where some researchers in the 80s are trying to find out if there really was a 1940s lesbian superhero? So now we can have some of the 1940s characters show up in the 80s also. And that way the 80s characters can like give perspective on what was happening in the 40s. And I was like, cool. Only twice the visual research. That's cool. Great. Thank you. And then the story just grew from there. And I remember when we had first started talking about it, it was like, oh no, I might not get done with this till I'm 30. And now we're at page 144 and nowhere near the vague ending that we are eventually like flying towards. But we did a lot of like talking on road trips to conventions about exactly where we wanted the plot to go. And we've had anywhere between like 20 to 50 pages of buffer script that I'm slowly working through to Barry being like, oh yeah, I'll write another page can I get it 2 by Tuesday? Okay, cool. Like, completely last minute. So it's fun.
Yeah. I feel like I've only been doing Magical Boy for like 2 to 3 years, so it's still like very young and short compared to but I started that webcomic knowing that there will be an end, It's just a matter of like, well, during it, I did had to extend it a little bit than the original. Oh, it was only going to be 24 chapters, but it turned out to be 30 chapters instead. So like it was extended a little bit, but I knew like I wanted to end it in a certain way. But yeah, there's always a possibility of like, oh, I could do derivative work of like certain characters within that world, you know, if I ever wanted to. But like the short story itself, it's like contained in it like that, like it's wrapped up nicely. But I also have like my other series, Mondo Mango, which is about my life, and that is never ending, and I don't know if that's gonna ever end or I'm just tired. So like that's where I know it's like kind of unknown. When it's like the story, I know it's like there's an ending that I'm reaching for. But if it's like slice of life, yeah, it's up in the air.
As for me, I neglected to mention earlier, like with one of my recent chapters, I purposefully wrote it so that it ended up at like 69 pages. Nice. So that's just how goofy I am with my decision making. But yeah, I think it's there's multiple layers to like the format, because I write so that each page has something of like a little bit of a cliffhanger a lot of the time, because people who are reading on a weekly basis, they want that kind of impetus to keep like catching up constantly. But then when you get to the end of a printed volume, you also need like a bigger cliffhanger. So it's like, here's all these little cliffhangers that lead to the big cliffhanger, and eventually there won't be any cliffhangers anymore. And I don't know how I feel about that. But yeah, it's weird, like thinking about a webcomic ending, because like you say, there's something that's like a constant in your life. And I feel like when I finish this, I won't ever want to do a long webcomic again, because I'm knackered. And I've also been doing a lot of like short comics at the same time for like anthologies or just like personal projects and things. And then I had to take a break for like a year and a half to do a chunky graphic novel. And I think that showed me like working on a weekly basis is actually really hard for me. Like I really much prefer planning out a whole comic contained and then kind of doing it in stages, so like all the pencils and all the inks and all the colors. Whereas with my webcomic, I have to kind of like do it on a page base, like page by page, if you get what I mean. So it feels like it's a lot slower, and I'm extremely impatient, so I want to get to the end.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of impatient, the other art thing I do besides Super Butch mainly is one panel or two panel cartoons on postcard paper. And that's what I'm used to doing. So yeah, those, I don't even think of it as a webcomic because it's a thing that I make all on paper, but nobody would see, you know, I would like send it home to mom, but probably 5 or 10 people would see it if I didn't put it online. So it feels funny thinking of that as a webcomic. I don't even want to think about trying to like get a print version of a giant stack of things.
Yeah.
But it's the nice way to share them. But yeah, it's different between having something that you have an idea of and then you take 3 hours to draw it and then it's online, and the other option is like, I can't wait till you guys get to chapter 5 in like a year and a half. Like,
yeah.
So
I think it's I was just gonna add, like, I think it's always been a weird concept for me as well, like the idea of not being able to read a comic. So like I don't know, it feels unnatural to me that, like, I don't know, how can I put it, like, if I make a comic, eventually it's always going to be free to read, because I hate the idea of like a forever paywall to reading something. So like with comics that are exclusive to print, for example, so like I did one of the comics for one of the anthology nominees as well this year, Come Together, and that has only been in that so far, but eventually I want to put either like a PDF online or just put it online somewhere, like one of my webcomic pages, because like to me it feels inherently wrong to, like, I don't know, not have access to comics. It's just like a weird, like, monster inside me like, no, everyone should be able to read this.
I think that's an amazing sentiment, and that kind of thing has existed before, but it's so much easier to execute that mindset now, as you guys talked about, as everyone here talked about in the beginning, that there's not a lot of barriers between being able to create webcomics, especially financially. It's pretty inexpensive, aside from maybe whatever software you may be using to create your comics if you do them digitally, or materials that you need to create it. The rest is just find a place that'll let you put it online. For the most part, there's so many free ways to do that. We do have, so we're at a little less than 10 minutes left for the panel, and we do have an audience question from another finalist, Alex Hassan, asks, do you see any differences between what the webcomic community and industry was like when you started versus how it is now? And maybe with that, thinking about the differences maybe from when you started as a reader to, transitioning into being a creator.
I feel like the expectations are a little different. I think of myself as someone who's not online by choice, to be honest. But like, when I started reading webcomics, like I remember like the expectation was, short 4-panel. It's probably about 20 somethings. There might be a coffee shop, or it'll be a diary, and. I like both of those things, and I also think that there's just like a broader expectation of like what kind of genre, what they look like, what kind of stories you can look for. So I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think that's what I've noticed as well. Like starting out when I was a reader, there was like a lot of slice of life. So it was either like anime and manga, which is like scan, or there was like slice of life, like XKCD, like stuff like that. And I think it's just changed so much. Like there's a lot of like narrative long form stories. Like the genre, like you mentioned, Becky, has like diversified so much. There's like really something for everyone out there now. I really think that. And I think it's just so cool to see how much it's grown and how mainstream webcomics have become. Like everyone knows what webcomics are now, right? And chances are like everyone's read one too.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest difference I've seen is just like in kind of the quality that creators are able to put out on a regular basis now. Like I think when I started, like I had a lot of friends who were making webcomics, and like it was all very like sketchy stuff. It was all meant to be very quick, because it wasn't seen as like the final version of that comic, I guess. It's like it wasn't seen at, like this would be like sort of 10 years ago, it was seen as, I don't know, like half finished, I suppose. But now, like Magical Boy, it's designed for web, so it's like the most polished version it could possibly be, and that's incredible. Like, yeah, I think it also has to do with like how far technology has come as well. Because like you can view these comics on like a 4K screen, I suppose, if you really wanted to. So people are making them, to be viewed at as high a quality as possible. But yeah, back then it was like you say, someone could have made a comic in MS Paint, slapped it on, and you didn't have huge readerships at the time either, I think. So there wasn't as high of an, I guess, like I'm saying, like the expectation for quality has also grown as the audiences have grown.
Yeah. With the accessibility of like mobile stuff too, and just easier for a lot more people to share their stories. And because of that, like more people want to share their stories, and people like, oh, I want a story about this, and I don't see it, so now I'll make it myself, which is what I basically did with Magical Boy.
Yeah.
I see that more of like, yes, more identifying comics. Yes, please go make it if you can. So it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like you need to have like super professional, polished digital everything to put your own webcomic out there.
Of course.
Some of the best webcomics out there are ones that are so insanely simple.
Yeah.
There's a beauty to that as well.
Of course.
To that beginning. This brought up another question for me, because remembering as newspapers were dying out, this idea of a daily or weekly comic, like mini story format. Everybody was like always terrified that it was going to go away, and seeing webcomic startup was, it definitely wasn't the same thing as a newspaper comic, but seeing what it's grown into now, I feel like in the history of comics, it'll be seen as though webcomics replaced the daily newspaper comic. From a historical perspective, working for the Cartoon Art Museum, you go from something that's produced daily, has to go in a newspaper, that everybody has to like it. It can't be a niche audience, to through becoming digital, becoming like the same idea of like small snippets of story bit by bit that you get to consume, but completely getting the opposite side of expression in terms of being able to tell any story you want. And I guess also with that, and with the change to the mobile format, which is inspired a lot by Korean comics that Tapas does that format. Brooke, have you seen that format changing the way that people are telling stories, or what kind of stories people are choosing to tell?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think the Korean vertical scroll format has had a big impact. I think, Cal, you can also speak a little bit to this as well, having done more 4-panel or page format before. But we're starting to see a lot more people interested in this style, and seeing the different things you can play around with, for example, really long shots, or you guys might have even seen that infamous horror comic where it's animated and it jumps out at you. So I think webcomics as a medium, it's really so it feels very you can express yourself in a lot of different ways, and it feels less limited, I think, in some ways, because you can make that strip as long as you want, right? You can even add animations. You can add things like music to your comics, which in a newspaper you're not going to get that. So I think it's definitely kind of people are taking it and running with it, and kind of pushing the boundaries of that with their creativity.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of kind of talk around like you mentioned earlier, Cal, I wanted this, but no one else was making it, so I just did it. And I think that's brilliant. There's so many kind of shows that you watch, movies, books you read, other comics, print comics, where you go, oh, I wish there was a version of this wasn't so toxic. And then you can go to webcomics, and people have done the same concepts, but so much better and so much gayer that it's so much more fun to read. So you end up just going, bah, don't want other media, webcomics only, more webcomics.
Sorry, you got me. You can do it so much gayer. I needed a minute to recover. We do have another audience question from Tab asking, and I think this is a good question after talking about how creatively expansive webcomics can be. If you could magically create hundreds of pages of a new webcomic without having to actually draw it, what kind of massive story would you tackle? Yeah, it's the idea that you wouldn't have to put the drawing side of the work into the story. I think gives us so much freedom.
Getting into digital art, where you have now all these tools, if you're, exposed. Wait, what's that word? Exposal. Yes. So I'm just I don't know what I want to try first. I know I want to do this, but I don't know. Kind of numb to the possibilities.
Oh, I get what you mean. Like you're kind of sat in front of a blank canvas, like with just you could put anything on it. It's like, oh, this is paralyzing. I can't choose.
Exactly.
I think for me, I'd probably choose like I've always wanted to do like a high fantasy thing, but the world building would take forever to draw. So, like the settings are always complicated for those kind of stories. And I also a thing that I actually do genuinely want to do is a sports series. But I've been putting it off for so long because it's going to require so much research and reference material, and I'm going to have to draw so much movement, so much. So if someone could just magically manifest like hundreds of pages of that for me, I'd just be like, sports.
I mean, I'm booked at the moment, but drawing's the fun part for me. I don't want to like I really like the part where you like do a deep dive and you're like, I found the perfect stove for this cabin. Yeah, that's I'm glad Barry's doing the script because I really like that part.
And I don't know if you wanted one more chance to follow up since you were overwhelmed before. I mean, another way to answer it might be, has there ever been a moment where you paused on doing your current story in a certain way because you realized how much effort and sort of resources would need to go into drawing it was more than what you were able to budget for? Sort of time.
I would definitely have more. Well, if I was working on my current series, I would have like more stuff in it, like interactions between characters, and like of course backgrounds and stuff are always hard to find. And if that was just ready to go, I'm like, yes, let's go do this. More magic, more like if we could do animation too, I'll throw that in there. More effects. I'd be like, yes, I'll throw that in there. And then also like, if it was just, I don't know. Maybe like doing a lot of short stories would be out there too, but like a dream happened and there's a whole sequence in my dream and I want to like share that too.
For me, like I think it's just like the wish that there was more time to devote to the story, because like you say, with like your side characters and stuff, you want to devote more time to them, but you also need to keep the main plot moving forward at a pace, so you have to cut side stuff as much as possible, because otherwise your story will like grind to a halt and you'll end up like One Piece where like you're 900 chapters in and you're nowhere near the end. So like here's a little tidbit. I had a character that I really wanted to put in, but he was like a teacup salesman, and I really wanted him to like appear in every chapter as like a gag character that was constantly called out as like a con man, and all of like the cups he was selling were like fakes and stuff. And I'm like, oh, it's still so funny to me. And like I pictured him, he had like one of those 20s hats. It was super cute, but I had to cut him because it would have wasted too much time to keep like devoting space to this gag character. It would have slowed the story to a halt. So yeah, you have to kill your darlings, I suppose.
And an interesting phrase to end on for today. I want to thank everybody on the panel for participating. It's there's so much possibility out there, but sometimes as writers, the editing process is important no matter what medium you're doing. But while you guys are doing that work, while you folks are doing that work, where can everybody find more of your creation, more of what you put out into the world?
Do you want to do the same intro order?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You can find like everything I put out on my personal website, thecow.net, or you can find me on Tapas, the website where Magical Boy is.
Yeah, you can find more series that I've edited apart from Magical Boy also on tapas.io.
You can find all of my work on thermit.co.uk, and I'm Jaded Lyco on most social media.
And you can find my comic at superbutchcomic.com and Becky and Shoulder Angel for my postcards on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And maybe if any of you have Discord accounts, we'll see you on the Discord community throughout the weekend. There's some fun chatting going on already, which I always love to see. And otherwise, I hope everybody here follows everybody that we have and just enjoys the wealth of content that we are celebrating this weekend. So thank you so much, guys. We're going to go back and show you the schedule for the rest of the day, and then we'll be back at 3 o'clock for the next program.